Greetings and welcome to the Home Slice. This is a standard intro. If you already know what's up with my 40mm Manila rope testing, the ANDE rope test, then you can skip to this time listed on screen. This is where the actual edge test begins. If you haven't been here before, then you've caught me in the middle of a testing series where I'm taking Victorinox knives because they're simple steel that's mainly just steel. There's not a bunch of extra alloys and carbide things going on in them. And I'm testing what different sharpening stones do to them. I'm testing fine, medium, and coarse stones individually. Then I'm taking the best from those and I'm making what's called a dual grit edge. If you're new to the channel, a dual grit edge is where you sharpen one side coarse or medium and the other side of the edge you sharpen fine. It has some really interesting characteristics. Usually it creates an aggressive edge that lasts longer than it normally would with either coarse or fine, with some exceptions, which we're testing to find out. Anyway, my test consists of, I've got a little goofy rig that I slice through a 1 centimeter thick sisal rope, and it's on a 45-degree wedge. It's intended to transfer that force down, and then I measure how many kilograms of pressure it took to slice through the rope while holding the rope vertical. That's intended to take forward motion and quantify how much pressure it took to slice through. This gives you some rough idea of edge aggression. The next test is to cut through a 40mm thick Manila rope, and then I test on a best machine tester to test how keen and nice the edge stayed. I do that until it's over 400 grams on the best tester, checking with microscope and checking to see when it loses shaving capability in between tests. After 3, I will hammer the edge into a pine piano leg, and that's just to see if any of the edges break on impact. There are certain sharpening methods I've found that create an edge that's not as robust to impact tasks, and I want to kind of weed those out because for a working edge, I want it to be reasonably durable. Anyway, that's what we're testing for today. In just a second, we'll skip right over to the test footage, and I will let you know what the finishing stone that we're actually testing was.
Just a note before we get started, some guys have asked for scaling, and this is a measuring tape in millimeters. And as I try to get that mark on the left-hand side centered, I find I can't quite get the mark on the right on screen. So my best guess is that fully zoomed in, as all these tests are, my microscope, the full screen shoots about 1.8 millimeters. Now I've put 36 hyphens on screen, which means each of those is roughly 50 microns. So I'll bring that back later in the videos for scale. Alright guys, now that we've gone through the fine stones that performed the best on paper and tried them out in dual grit edges and found that Cerax stone 3000 grit made such a clean edge, we're going to try some different coarse stones with it. Not the best aggression reading that we have seen, but this edge from the Norton Crystolon medium side and the Suehiro Cerax, which you're looking at now, which always leaves a beautiful finish, is looking quite clean. I'm not seeing any deformed metal. I've left the 100 microns on each side there. This is the Norton side, and very, very little reflection, very little bending, and this is something I really like about this Norton Crystolon stone, is that on these softer steels, it tends to leave very minimal amounts of damage and cleanup quite nicely. Right off the bat, we've got really good aggression coming in at 265, which is nearly the best score we've ever had after one pass through the ANDE rope, coming up against the Shapton Glass 8K. But here at the second pass through the ANDE rope, we have squeezed past for a new best score by just 1 gram over the Veneve 7.5 micron OCB stone and screamed past the Arkansas Translucent at 308 on the third pass. Looking great under the microscope, still very clean, absolutely no hints of bending. And I think if you're going to use a medium stone, you'll get medium aggression out of your dual grit edge, which sort of makes sense. And if you're going to do that, this is a great economical stone to do that with. Definitely the best deep burring result that I have seen so far in terms of how it just comes off of the stone with minimal damaged metal and doesn't require tons of stropping, and a good solid sort of stable medium aggression edge. Our aggression reading after those 3 rope cuts, I'll freeze here. It goes up to 6.1 kg, giving us a reading of 4.1 kg. Now here I have to pause voiceover and progress and make a confession. I realized as I was going along, I made a mistake in my record keeping. For publishing and timing reasons, I can only go back so many episodes and republish them, but I wanted to admit and make known that the low of aggression loss is not 0.7 and it's not the Crystolon Coarse Stone. The actual lowest aggression lost of any stone were the Spyderco CBN 800 on both sides, non-dual grit, and Spyderco CBN 400, which lost 1.6 and 1.7 respectively. I'm really sorry for this mistake. I really try to keep on top of the data, but as it happened, I miscopied one of the numbers, and when I went back and put everything into a spreadsheet and did the resorts to check the numbers, I just realized in this point of editing that I had made a mistake for a few videos. So anyway, 1.6, 1.7, Spyderco, CBN 800 and 400 are the ruling champs right now. Anyway, back to the numbers. Now, if we take into account the original reading, that's 2.7 kilos of additional force needed to get through the rope after those 3 passes through the 40 millimeter Manila rope. We're coming up with a reading after batoning of 343 grams on the best. And that's a new low score. So as I said, the real stable edge, we did observe a loss of about 35 grams from the last reading. But heading over to the microscope to check out that impact zone, I'm not seeing anything that makes me overly concerned that we sustained any really substantial damage to either side of that edge. I don't see any folding over as we saw with the agate stone. I don't see any wire edge problems such as we saw with the Japanese natural dual grit edge. So it's back to the ANDE rope to absolutely smash another record. Here we have our 4th pass coming in at 373, which just breezes past where the Arkansas Translucent was at that stage. And then we finish up our journey here with a 474. Now I'll just take a moment to do a little bit of analysis because I think it's worth mentioning that the Arkansas Translucent stone cut a full 7 passes, but it only did so when it was fresh and there was that finish that came from factory. After it's worn down a bit, it performs a little bit more like a Spyderco Ultrafine, which is great performance, just not the miracle that it was to begin with. So while it's quite a good stone, I don't think that on paper it's quite as good as it seemed because the performance has changed over time. When it comes to dual grit edges, we've got 5 cuts out of a couple edges before, one of them being the Easy Lap 250 grit diamond and agate, and the other being the Easy Lap and the Shapton Glass 8K. So this is like amongst the second best readings in terms of passes through the rope that have ever happened. However, both of those edges, the agate and the Shapton Glass, showed signs of wire edge sticking up in the microscope and also folding over when we pounded them into the piano leg. So I would call this the cleanest, most reproducible, long-lasting aggression that we have seen so far. This combination of the Norton Crystolon medium for your coarse stone and Suehiro Cerax 3000 grit for the fine stone I definitely would find this to be recommendable. It deburrs really easily and offers really solid and really predictable performance. A link to the video where I compare the Cerax I'm using now to my King 6K is on screen now. For the rest of you, I'll say peace out from the home slice.